I've been following Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s claims about vaccines for over 10 years now, so I'm not surprised that now that he's in the spotlight more than ever, he's essentially continuing to tell the exact same lies, unchanged, that he was 10 years ago. But now he's using this flashpoint in his fame and the backing of podcasters like Joe Rogan to make his claims sound more reasonable. Make no mistake, they are not reasonable at all. So in this video, I'm going to be debunking some of his major claims that he made in a video he put out to his followers on Twitter just recently. And I'm going to be highlighting some things that he neglected to tell you about himself, because if you knew the truth about these things, you definitely would not want to listen to him. Hey, I'm Dr. Wilson. I'm a PhD molecular biologist, and let's jump right into this mess.
So let's begin with my first point, which is probably the most controversial. Vaccines have side effects, just like every other drug. This shouldn't be controversial, but it is.
No, Robert, it is not controversial to say that vaccines have side effects. All medications, everything, has side effects. That is well acknowledged by scientists and reasonable people pretty much everywhere. But that's not what you're saying, Robert. That's not what you've been saying for the last 20 years. You've been saying that vaccines are downright dangerous. You've been encouraging people to not vaccinate. You've straight up told people, don't get your child vaccinated. You think that vaccines cause autism.
Our job is to resist and to talk about it to everybody. You're walking down the street, and I do this now myself, which is, I don't want to do, I'm not a busybody. I see somebody on a hiking trail with carrying a little baby, and I say to him, better not get him vaccinated. And he heard that from me. If he hears it from 10 other people, maybe he won't do it. Maybe he will save that child.
So please, if you're going to talk about these things, don't have this facade that, oh, you're just asking questions. You're just being a reasonable person, because no, that's not what you've done for the past 20 years. You've spread baseless conspiracy theories and lies about vaccines. Just be honest about that if you're going to be making these videos saying that you are an honest, different person than the Republicans or Democrats. But I guess that would mean having to admit that he's not reasonable, so yeah, that shows you where his priorities are. Anyway, to get back to vaccines have side effects, the big question with any medication or vaccine is to ask, does the benefit outweigh the risk? Are we getting more benefit from taking this product than we are putting ourselves at risk by taking it? This is pretty much the core question that any vaccine safety study is going to contribute to answering. And all of the vaccine safety studies show that the benefits do outweigh the risk of vaccines, because these risks are truly rare, and the adverse events that we're preventing by vaccinating are huge. Kennedy is never going to tell you or acknowledge the fact that in America, before we had vaccines for any of these particular diseases, polio paralyzed 30,000 kids every year. It also unalived 1,500 kids every year. Before measles vaccines in America, measles every year would hospitalize about 50,000 kids. The medical bill for that hospitalization would be tens of thousands of dollars, on average about $47,000 today. In addition, measles would unalive about 500 kids every year in America before vaccines. And not only were those hospitalizations difficult and traumatizing for the children and the parents, but could leave the children permanently injured. And I don't know if you've noticed, but back in the day, there were a lot more schools for the deaf. There were a lot more deaf children back in the day, because mumps would take away the hearing of about 6,000 American kids per year. That's mumps alone. Measles could also do that, and also a disease called rubella. In fact, before vaccines, rubella infections during pregnancy would cause about 20,000 kids in America each year to be born either blind or deaf or have severe heart defects. There's a lot more I could mention here, but for now I'll just also include rotavirus, which before vaccines in America hospitalized about 75,000 kids per year with horrible diarrhea disease, and would unalive about 60 kids per year. And rotavirus is one of those diseases that, again, causes extreme diarrhea, and you essentially go by way of dehydration, which is an awful way to go. And in the US and developed countries, we're lucky that we have medical care that can give us support during that time so that we actually survive. But in countries where medical infrastructure is not as good, that's not as easy to get, which is why worldwide rotavirus kills about 186,000 kids per year. But I'm pretty sure if RFK Jr. got his way, those kids would have a lot harder time getting vaccines and rotavirus would cause even more deaths. So when we say that vaccines are safe and effective, we don't mean that there are no side effects. We mean that the benefits they bring greatly outweigh the risks, and that they are effective in eliminating a lot of risk that infectious disease can bring to us. It is so easy to identify the horrors that vaccine-preventable diseases used to cause. But when it comes to vaccines, as you'll see in this video, anti-vaxxers have to lie to make them seem just a little scary. When Robert's saying they are not safe and effective, he doesn't just mean that they have side effects. He's saying that they're dangerous. He's saying that people shouldn't get them. And he's been saying this for the past 20 years. Now that I've hit you with that cold water, let's get to this part in the video where he pulls out a package insert for the hepatitis B vaccine.
This is the insert that comes in the box with the hepatitis B vaccine.
This is a classic trick that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and several people like him love to do. They pull out a package insert, which is a legal document more than anything, and they deceptively read from it. He goes on to read what he calls a list of side effects that the vaccine causes.
Let me read you just a few of the serious side effects in this document. Under the heading of nervous system disorders, it says Guillain-Barré syndrome, multiple sclerosis, exacerbation of multiple sclerosis, myelitis, including transverse myelitis, seizure, febrile seizure, peripheral neuropathy, including Bell's palsy, radiculopathy.
But this list of side effects are not actually side effects. What happens in a package insert is that it's legally required to list things that were reported post-market. What this means is that after the vaccine was rolled out, people were getting the vaccine. Some people would report events that happened after they got the vaccine. The FDA and pharmaceutical companies take these reports in and list them. That's it. In fact, it even says right above the section that he's reading, quote, "The following adverse reactions have been identified during post-approval use of hepatitis B vaccine. Because these reactions are reported voluntarily from a population of uncertain size, it is not always possible to reliably estimate their frequency or establish a causal relationship to the vaccine." That's right above this list he's reading that he's telling you in this video are side effects that the vaccine causes. He's lying. What scientists actually do to determine if these events are actually caused by the vaccine is to do large-scale studies where they take two big groups. One group did not get the vaccine, the other group did get the vaccine, and they compare the rates of these adverse events between these two groups. They can also just take a big group of vaccinated people and ask, do the rates of these adverse events increase relative to what we would expect in a normal population before this vaccine was even out? Both of these kinds of studies and much more are done for all vaccines, and the results are not ambiguous. The results are that these vaccines are very safe and are very good at preventing the diseases that they are meant to prevent. So off the back of this lie, Robert continues to go on saying that vaccine side effects are real. Yeah, everybody acknowledges that. And he highlights COVID vaccines next, which is a weird example to pick because I don't know if you remember, but in 2021, when COVID vaccines were rolling out to millions of people and we were seeing the rare side effects that could only be caught when the vaccine was rolled out to millions of people, that rare side effects were being reported on. Myocarditis, being a very rare side effect of mRNA vaccines, was plastered on the headlines. Everybody was talking about it. Everybody knew about it. Not only was it not ignored, but scientists worked hard to figure out how to make it safer. An example of this was the recommendation to space out the 2 doses of mRNA vaccine that were recommended at the time from a period of 4 weeks between the 2 shots to a period of at least 8 weeks between the 2 shots. This greatly reduced the risk of myocarditis. Not only that, but the risk-benefit analysis was taken into account because COVID had a much greater risk of causing myocarditis. And we know that myocarditis, when it's caused by a virus, is more severe than what we've seen with these cases following mRNA vaccines. Plus, COVID carried a risk of lots of other things, like lung damage from pneumonia, like blood clotting from the vasculitis that it caused. And of course, COVID was way more likely to land you in the hospital, in the ICU, or in a casket than a vaccine ever was. So while there definitely does need to be a system in place for people who genuinely have been affected by COVID vaccines negatively, and I will make a video about that sometime soon, it doesn't negate the fact that COVID vaccines had a much greater benefit than they did ever have a risk. And it's just false to say that those risks were ignored or not taken into account. Next, Kennedy is going to mention Dr. Bernadine Haley, who was a director of the NIH from 1991 to 1993. And the reason he mentions her in this video is because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. does believe that vaccines cause autism. It's one of the core beliefs of his nonprofit group, the Children's Health Defense, but he doesn't want to say that himself. So he has Dr. Bernadine Haley say it for him.
I haven't seen major studies that focus on 300 kids who got autistic symptoms within a period of a few weeks of a vaccine.
And there it is. There's her saying it for him. He wants to make you think that because she was the director of the NIH for 2 years, that her words have more weight or some credibility to them. And they just don't, because the evidence does not support them, nor does the majority of the scientific community. Vaccines don't cause autism. The fact that I still have to say this in 2024 is deeply frustrating. There have been dozens of studies looking into this very thoroughly, and all of them conclude that there is no association between vaccines and an increased risk of autism. I've talked about them before on my channel. I'll link them in the description, but just briefly, these studies have involved studying groups of vaccinated and unvaccinated children. The studies include studying specific claims around the MMR vaccine causing autism, and it also examines whether or not all of the vaccines together can increase the risk of autism. In both cases, the answer is no. So don't let the talking brain worm fool you. The evidence is not on his side when he says that vaccines cause autism. And that is definitely what he says. Because back when he started his nonprofit, which is now called the Children's Health Defense, it was originally called the World Mercury Project. Because back then, he thought that mercury in vaccines caused autism. Mercury in the form of a compound called thimerosal was used in some vaccines as a preservative so that the vaccine doesn't go bad during shipment or storage. No studies ever showed it to be dangerous to children, but because of these kinds of concerns that anti-vaxxers are bringing up, it was removed from vaccines in 2001. So if it was removed and that's what was causing autism, Kennedy should be happy about that. But no, he immediately pivoted to say that aluminum adjuvants in vaccines were causing autism. But not all vaccines have aluminum adjuvants, so for there he has an excuse too, that something else is causing autism. It's just absolutely ridiculous. It's not a serious position to take. It's just one that he uses to continue this grift that he has of running his nonprofit, which brings in about $15 million for him every year, and pays him about $500,000, and otherwise brings him a lot of attention that he otherwise wouldn't get, even with the Kennedy name. But I digress. Let's move on to his next claim that he always makes.
And as a result of that bill, vaccines are the only consumer product that are completely shielded from liability. That means that no matter how reckless the company behaves, no matter how negligent they are, no matter how grievous your injury, you can't sue them.
When he says that pharmaceutical companies are completely free of liability, no matter how negligent they are, that is just not true. But what he's talking about is the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, where to make it easier for people to actually get compensation for their injury, instead of suing a pharmaceutical company that has a lot of resources, a lot of lawyers to basically crush any opposing lawsuit, the person who suffered a vaccine adverse event could instead go to a no-fault court system where they just have to show that their injury was associated with the vaccine, and then they get a payout for their compensation. This way, people who were genuinely suffering from adverse events from vaccines had an easy route to quick compensation for their suffering. Because again, we acknowledge that vaccines are not 100% safe and in rare cases can cause adverse events. However, it should very much be acknowledged, and Kennedy will never tell you this, that most of the injuries that are paid out in this compensation program are for shoulder injuries, where the nurse or person giving the vaccine put the needle too deep or in the wrong place and caused an injury to the shoulder. Again, that's most, not all, but it does put things into perspective about how rare very serious adverse events to vaccines actually are. Oh, and Robert knows that he can sue vaccine companies because he does it himself. Yeah, he has several ongoing lawsuits against vaccine companies, while he's sitting there telling you you can't sue them. The last thing that Kennedy does in this video is he appeals to my freedoms.
And my last point is this: freedom means having the right to choose. If a person does not have the final decision over their own bodies, and they are owned by whoever does.
So when it comes to infectious disease like COVID that is spreading from person to person, and in 2021, at a time these mandates were imposed, when COVID was unaliving 4,000 Americans a day at its peak, it's no longer about the individual choice. It's about public health, because the person next to you could affect your own health, and they don't have the right to put you at more risk. So when we had a tool like vaccines that we knew gave people a really good immune response that was allowing them to reduce their risk of being infected and reduce their risk of spreading the virus and reduce their risk of developing severe disease that landed them in the hospital and prevented them from overrunning the hospital, that was a big public health measure that people ought to take.
But Dr. Wilson, why do I need a vaccine if you have one?
Well, like I've said before, vaccines are not 100% effective, so not everybody is going to benefit equally from getting a vaccine. They also help prevent you from landing in the hospital. And we know that during the pandemic, overrun hospitals lead to unnecessary losses of life that otherwise wouldn't happen, because the hospital's resources and staff are too busy to promptly tend to emergencies. We saw this happen in hospital systems where people were being unalived by things like gallstones or appendicitis or cardiac emergencies that otherwise could have been dealt with, but the hospital just couldn't respond quickly enough. People don't have the right to put others at risk in this way, especially when their reasons for refusing the tool that could help alleviate all of this are based in nonsense and fear that is really not founded in any evidence. In fact, it's founded in straight up lies or misinformation that people are telling you so that they can profit financially or personally themselves. But it's a pretty effective strategy for Robert to tap into that sense of freedom and individualized spirit. And so he does it. So while Robert tries to present himself as a reasonable person who's just asking questions and trying to hold big bad pharma accountable, he's not really doing that. He's just spreading disinformation, the same disinformation that he's been spreading for 20 years that has been constantly debunked, and expecting you to believe it because now he has a bigger stage and a bigger platform. But don't believe the guy who went to American Samoa and was at least complicit in the unaliving of about 86 children from measles. Yep, he went there and teamed up with local anti-vaccine advocates to say that measles vaccines were dangerous. As a result, or at least coincidingly, the measles vaccination rate dropped, and a measles outbreak occurred that unalived 83 kids, which he to this day still does not take any responsibility for and continues to spread misinformation about measles vaccines, encouraging people not to take them. This is the guy who wrote the foreword to and endorsed a book about COVID vaccines supposedly causing sudden unalivings in children. But not only have COVID vaccines in several studies of millions of children shown to not increase their risk of unaliving, but many of the kids in this book were confirmed to have actually been unalived by genetic disorders, drug overdoses, flu complications, or unaliving themselves. One even was unalived in a surfing accident. And the parents of these kids have desperately been trying to get their names of their children removed from this book and sue the author, but it's been very difficult for them to do so because these lawsuits are so expensive.
It puts Braden's death in a very false light. Braden was not vaccinated, so it really doesn't pertain to him in any way, shape, or form. And
it's so far from what his story is, and it's infuriating that somebody could be so heartless.
But Kennedy still has his tweet up promoting the book, and he apparently doesn't care about any of this misinformation that it spreads. This is also the guy who on his website says that polio vaccines don't work because polio isn't a virus. It's a toxin. He promotes the idea that polio is not a virus and it's a toxin. Do I need to say more? I don't think I do, but I will. This is also the guy who thinks that HIV does not cause AIDS and that the medications used to turn AIDS from a death sentence to a manageable disease are poison. He dedicates hundreds of pages of his book to this very idea. He not only promotes and praises several of the key players who have popularized the idea that HIV does not cause AIDS, but he also features one person he calls an HIV activist. And he uses her to promote his ideas in this book, but he doesn't tell her full story. and that is that she herself was HIV positive, and in the 90s, herself died of AIDS because she didn't think that the medications used to treat HIV were good. She thought they were poison. And not only did she lose her own life, but she passed HIV on to her daughter before she herself went. And her daughter was unalived 1 year before her from HIV/AIDS. These are the kinds of real harms that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at the very least promotes and is complicit in spreading. It could be fun to laugh at the brainworm and black bear jokes, but this man, to his core, is deeply unreasonable. Denying science and denying medicine is harmful. It is dangerous. And he has no problem doing it as long as it promotes himself. His ideas and his popularity are going to carry on after this election. And I want you to be informed. I want you to know that he is not being honest with you, that science is not on his side. And I'm a small account on YouTube. I have a day job. I have a family. But I'm going to try my best to bring you this information and show you the kind of person that Kennedy and people like him are. They don't speak for the science. They don't tell you the truth. They aren't honest with you. They want to deceive and bring you into fear so that you support them and their causes. And like I said, this is extremely profitable for people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
But Dr. Wilson, Big Pharma makes way more money.
Well, the wellness industry is actually a larger industry than pharmaceutical companies. Go figure. But pharmaceutical industries, while they're not innocent, they do make medications that actually bring benefit and help people. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and people like him, they don't. They just don't. They bring no value, and they take in a lot of money. The two are not even on the same level to be compared. Like I said, I do hope that these videos inform you, and you can inform yourself even more with the links that I'm including in the description below, which includes a bunch of scientific papers, a reference manager with a lot of papers itself, and all of the sources that I'm using in this video. So please take advantage of those resources, inform yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.